Welcome back to the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. This episode, we welcome back Ethan Sachs, writer of Star Wars Bounty Hunters, as well as the recently released Star Wars Jango Fett over at Marvel Comics, as well as the co-writer of the book A Haunted Girl with his daughter Naomi Sachs, which came out recently and in a trade paperback coming out very, very soon at a bookstore and local comic book shop near you. Ethan has writing credits of Old Man Hawkeye, Old Man Quill, Kiss Zombies, as well as Galaxy's Edge and Alliance over there at Star Wars Universe as well. So check out this episode here for Star Wars Week on the Capes and Tights podcast. Before you do, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, all the social media platforms, as well as rate, review, subscribe, all those things over on Apple and Spotify and all your major podcasting platforms, as well as over at YouTube and capesandtights.com. But this episode is Ethan Sachs, comic book writer for Star Wars Bounty Hunters and Star Wars Jango Fett. Check it out, everybody. Thanks. Welcome back to the podcast. Ethan Sachs, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. I'm glad because last time we had you on to talk A Haunted Girl, which just wrapped up and
Yes.
is coming to trade paperback this summer. Well, actually, that's technically not summer because it's June 4th. It's before the summer, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
It's coming out soon. I bet you're excited. I bet you
I
and your
think
daughter are
actually
excited.
May 21st, so almost upon us.
Oh, is it May 21st now? Oh, it's because
Yeah.
it's coming out. Is it bookstores on June 4th? Is it possible?
No, I think bookstores May. I hope it's May 21st because we have a signing on May 22nd. We're literally like landing from Japan, visiting the in-laws on May 21st, doing the signing on the 22nd, and then flying to Ireland for a wedding on the 23rd. So that'll be an interesting.
It is true. Bookshop.org, which I use a lot to like support local bookstores and things like that, says June 4th. So,
Oh, really? Okay.
but Previews World has it the 22nd, and I'm guessing Amazon does too. So,
Okay. Well, I'm hoping because otherwise it'll be a really ugly signing. Just sitting there twiddling thumbs.
signing pieces of paper, like just put this in
Yeah.
your book. Don't worry about it.
It's like the Star Wars action figures where back in like 1977 where and I remember that you had to get an IOU
Yes.
uh, before you actually got them. Yeah.
That's weird. Yeah, because this is Previews World. So bookstores is yeah, Amazon says June 4th too, but Diamond does say, or so yeah, Previews World does say the 22nd, which means that that's there, but I don't know. You have to figure that out on your own.
Okay.
That's not my problem. No, no, but it's coming out soon. Haunted Girl. It's
Yes.
amazing, wonderful story that you and your daughter co-wrote, and I'm excited for people to actually get in their hands if they haven't yet. Because if they missed the first few issues, it's always one of those things that do you continue buying single issues or do you wait for the trade and those things. So we're excited for people to actually get it in their hands
Yeah,
in trade format. I bet you guys are too.
Definitely excited about that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wanted to start off by that because it's such a phenomenal series, and my co-host for my comics of the year had it in there as his one of his top 10 comics of the year. So he was pretty excited about.
Thank you. I mean, that's an honor. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of great stuff out. So just to be on that list is a great honor.
we've
And
worked. Yeah,
appreciate it.
exactly. That's awesome. But yeah, we're here to talk Star Wars. Not to push that off the side, but that's the topic of conversation for today here on the podcast. So we touched on it when you were on last time about a little bit about Star Wars on your history of the universe and so on. But you've been a Star Wars fan since you were a little lad. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunately or unfortunately old enough that I was 4 years old when the first movie came out, and it's like one of my earliest memories. I still remember vividly sitting in the movie theater in Times Square in New York City, um, and just the Star Destroyer going overhead, the John Williams music
Yeah.
kicking in, and turning and seeing my father smiling at me because he had seen it already
Yeah.
before me. So that was his second time, but yeah, so it was a you know something clicked in my brain and it kind of changed the course of my life after that.
At least it worked out well for your dad. Unlike some people, like I feel like when I show movies like to my wife or eventually my son's 3, so some things don't click yet. But like the idea of showing someone something that you're really excited for, like so your dad was probably really excited for you to see it
Yeah.
and have this happen and have you be like, so would have been awful, but at least it worked out in his benefit because you were
Yeah.
actually excited to be there.
Fortunately, I got my daughter into Star Wars, although I tried when she was like 4, the same age as me, and it didn't click. And then I tried again at 6, and it did. So
There you go. So nowadays, like my son will throw on like Young Jedi Adventures on
Yeah.
Disney Plus and stuff like that. So like, luckily there is this thing, and he has the little golden books that have like things that he sees pictures and stuff. And I was listening to last week in my car the audiobook of Heir to the Empire,
Mm.
and so he can see from the back seat he sees like the little Star Wars like image of the audiobook, and he's like, "Dad, you listen to the Star Wars?" I'm like, "Yeah," and he was like mimicking some of the words that were happening so he can understand a little bit what's going on. And so he knows Star Wars, but not to the point where he's going to be a fan of Star Wars yet.
Fair enough.
He'll get there, right? Just a time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hopefully he won't be like my buddy and be kind of negative on Star Wars. But yeah, so you've been a Star Wars fan, and then you ended up becoming a writer of Star Wars over at Marvel. And what was your first Star Wars story? What book was that? Do you know?
Yes. So the first comic that I ever did was a 10-pager about Mace Windu called The Weapon. And it was one of the books in Age of Republic special. I want to say 2018. Sounds about right. And It was so special to me. I got a Mace Windu lightsaber tattoo, and I have a replica Mace Windu lightsaber. Uh, I have original art on the wall
Oh,
from,
that's awesome.
yeah, basically, it was Paolo Villanelli who knew that
Yeah.
we would kind of work together so much in the years to come. But yeah, it was kind of cool. And as my daughter told me, I was like so excited because I created this villain, Wataku the Grim, that's sort of this warlord that uses like children and slaves. And and he looks really cool, has this like animal skull helmet. So I was all excited and uh he dies on page 8 of a 10-page story. So my I was like telling my daughter, like, this is it. I've put a small piece into the canon of Star Wars and like live on forever and all this kind of stuff. And my daughter turned to me and she's like, "We'll live on to get forever because you killed him 8 pages into a 10-page story." So that was a life lesson for me. So like after that, I pretended to kill characters, but didn't actually kill major characters so that uh could come back to them.
It's perfect for your daughter to put you in your place and say, "Hey, you know what? You're wrong.
Yeah.
This." But I mean, that started things off, and obviously Marvel was excited to have you continuing to write Star Wars because you ended up doing some of the adaptations and things like that around movies and the ride Galaxy's Edge and things like that, right? You ended up doing those miniseries along the lines of that.
Yeah, I mean, those were it's funny because I don't know that at the time there was a huge demand to write a theme park related, and I don't think I was so excited to be asked because I realized that this was a place, Will Slimy, the artist, and I
Yeah.
realized this is a place that people will go to and be as close as you can get to experiencing that for yourself. So just to be a part of that was amazing to get to see the creative Bible. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit.
You're good.
Get, Getting to see the creative Bible of like, the concept art and the maps and all this kind of stuff, months ahead of time. It was just a privilege. And same thing for Allegiance, which was a prequel to Rise of Skywalker, where that one was kind of weird because Mike Seglain, head of Disney Publishing,
Yeah.
kind of brought into Marvel this laptop. I remember it was very secretive, hush hush, and showed like essentially storyboards for the
Mhm.
first, not even first third, because everything was so secret. So we had no idea. It's kind of ruins it a little bit for you because you don't, um, you don't have that as a fan getting to see
Yeah.
it for the first time in the theater with all the effects and the music and the acting. That being said, it was still pretty cool. So I got to kind of see a little bit of it, and I got to play with these characters that I certainly love, and Ray and Rose and
Mhm.
Finn and Poe, and and the other thing for me was special about that book was I came to comics through, I was a newspaper reporter before that, and I covered entertainment and covered movies. And one of my last interviews for the New York Daily News was actually Carrie Fisher. It was the first and last time I ever interviewed her for The Force Awakens. And so she had passed, and it was kind of cool for me who grew up. She was like my first crush as a little kid, and Princess Leia,
Yep.
and getting to write these kind of emotional political speeches for her, having a moment where she could sort of be with her daughter's character in a scene and talking, and that was kind of special for me. So I wanted to sort of pay homage to her. So those kind of series were special in their own way. And I
And you
got to
actually,
work with Luke Ross,
yes,
who
so you got
I am now
to pair
working
up with
with.
Luke Ross on that, which is your partner in
Yeah.
crime over at
Uh,
Django Fett right now too.
yeah, I mean, I've been so lucky with artists, everyone from Paolo Villanelli, Will
Hmm.
Sliney, Luke Ross, and then all the too many to name right now, but like all the sort of fill-in artists on Bounty Hunters.
Hmm.
Just it's been really lucky. They've certainly elevated, my hack scripts into art, literally and figuratively. So
Yeah, I
I'm
mean, you could. Yeah. It's the partnerships that's so great about comic books is the fact that you have a partner in crime. It's not just you doing this. It's not you alone.
yeah.
And I think like obviously in the Star Wars world, I'm guessing you have a lot of people that are involved in this. Not just, I mean, when you did, Haunted Girl, it was you, it was Naomi, it was your art team, it was your group. This is obviously there's people talking and telling you what to do, what you can't do, who you can go, so on and so forth. It's my buddy is a comic book artist, and he did a variant for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 that's coming out here pretty soon. And he had one of the turtles, and I'm not gonna mess it up. So one of the turtles skateboarding on the cover,
Mhm.
but only Michelangelo can only skateboard. So like, there was like this one of
Oh,
those things where they're like,
yeah.
so you had to like it's a little bit simpler in the turtles world. You could just tweak a few things and it becomes the other turtle. But he's like, yeah, submitted it to IDW, and IDW was like, nope, sorry, you can't have that turtle scale. It was Splinter skateboarding or something like that, and they're like, you can't do that, and so he had to change it. But that I'm guessing is also involved in writing a Star Wars comic book because there's people that you say this character's off limits or you can use this character or whatever.
For sure. I mean, I'm lucky in that I have both my amazing Marvel editors, led by Mark Benicia, and then the Lucasfilm Story Group, like just basically giving guidance, and it's not like the notes are not um, intrusive at all. Like they always make it better. A lot of times if you can't use a character, you can kind of suspect why, like, oh, they're coming up.
Mhm.
Like we couldn't use that much Boba Fett early on in Bounty Hunters, and then you see Book of Boba Fett comes out, and
Yeah.
so like at that time I didn't even know he was whether or not he survived the Sarlacc pit.
Yeah.
So um, even though we're set well before, I think like there was stuff happening, and so that's the kind of thing like occasionally, but they're always cool. Like they let me use a young Tasu Leech. That was something I pitched, and they were like, "Oh, that'd be kind of cool." As long as you don't kill him because he needs to die in the Force Awakens,
Yeah.
can kind of make this work. And so they're always very supportive and helpful, and they're like the biggest fans. It's like on one level they're the Jedi Council and they have the wisdom and they have the encyclopedic knowledge and all the databases at their disposal, and on the other hand they're all a bunch of like excited fans.
Yeah.
So it's
I've
like the
always said that
best
to people, like
combination.
people who complain about, say you did something in Bounty Hunters that they didn't have in their mind that would a bounty hunter would do, or the story went a direction that they didn't have pre-written in their head, is that 90% of the people who are working on these comics, from the writers, the artists, everybody, the letterers, are Star Wars fans. So like
Yeah.
these are people that are getting the ability to actually live out some of their dreams and their fantasies on paper, as well as the people who are working upper, studio. There are people who are in the job because they're good at growling people and doing certain things, but most of them have a background of being a Star Wars fan. So I always go, if this is the direction that your team wanted to go, great. I'll go with it. Just because it wasn't what I maybe have thought should have gone or whatever
Yeah.
doesn't mean that I'm right and you're wrong. You're all fans too. This is not your hired guns. This is you're all fans of these things. You wouldn't have taken a job to write a bounty hunters series if you're like, I don't like Star Wars. You know what I
No,
mean? Like
100%. There isn't, at least that I've seen in my, window working with, we had weekly Zooms with the other Marvel Star Wars writers, Charles and Greg and Alyssa and Mark Guggenheim. Occasionally others like Rodney Barnes and Justina Ireland and Daniel Jose Older would sort of parachute in. And everyone's excited. No one's cynical. No one's doing this because it's like, yeah, I need a job and I don't care about Star Wars. But like, there's none of that. They're like, oh my God, wouldn't it be cool if,
Yes.
and everyone reverts to like an 11-year-old in these conversations. So I just think there's something unique about this franchise that's just not, I think a lot of us came into it, whether depending on how old you are, whatever, whether it was through the originals, the prequels, or even the sequels, the animated. Um, some people came in through like Clone Wars and things like that. So like whatever it is, um, they love it. So there's none of that. It's just
Yeah.
not a cynical
No.
bunch that I've seen certainly.
And the cool thing I think in the Marvel, Marvel owns it, but Marvel's thing with like the MCU versus the comics versus the TV shows or the older TV shows versus the animated and all that stuff is that at one point they weren't all connected in a way that you
Mm.
could have written a Boba Fett story in the comic books, for an example, if this existed in the MCU, because
Mm.
the fact that it's not in the same quote unquote universe. So it wouldn't have mattered. You do what you want, have fun with it in the comic books, because in the movies it's a different thing. And luckily we have this in the Star Wars world, whereas like they're connected. So like the idea that what you're seeing in the comics it can relay into the movies or the TV shows and things like that. There are more of a big, wider, multi-medium universe. I have sitting next to me, you can't see, but the collection of the High Republic books, the novels. It's
Yeah.
like those are canon, and those are going to be used potentially, hopefully, to make movies and things like that in the future, or a movie might come out of one of the books
Yeah.
that are over here, and so on and so forth. So that's why it's a little different, I think, than other universes in the sense that like there is more control over Boba Fett, for example, because he had a TV show coming out and so on and so forth, which is really cool because I like the idea that you can't sit in front of a TV all day and watch the movies. Like you don't have the ability to. I was just mentioning listening to an audiobook in the car. I was able to intake some Star Wars fandom without having to be in front of a screen. And, maybe I'm reading a comic book or so on and so forth. So that's what's cool about the Star Wars
Yeah.
galaxy, I should say, instead of universe, that is different than anything else I think it's out there is that there's so much interconnectivity and things to keep track of. I don't want to be the person up top making sure this is all working correctly, by the way. I feel like that's a headache.
Yeah, I mean, they do a good job of it though because you're right. Like this is a franchise. You take like whatever, like Harry Potter or Lord of the
Mhm.
Rings or whatever it is. The books are separate from the movies. The movies might be adaptations of the books. You mentioned the High Republic. That's
Yeah.
its own world, and if they do make movies out of it, and certainly like the Acolyte coming up
Yeah.
is tied into it, is that will be its there'll be separate stories. Like they're not going to adapt a book because the sort of the philosophy is all of these things: the books, the comics, the theme parks, the video games, the live action, the animated TV, movies. It's all parts of a larger puzzle, and they all are important pieces. But you don't have to, look at all of them if you don't want to. Like you can be a more casual fan and just see the movies or whatever. But if you do, you're rewarded by like all this rich extra layer, of stuff. And the great thing about the High Republic was it started as this publishing initiative where basically it gave them the writers freedom because it wasn't all like mapped out already in other forms, and so they could just sort of go where their imaginations went without any kind of guardrails pretty much and look at this wonderful thing that came out of it, and so the way I see it is it's all like one of those medieval maps where like the edges are not drawn in because they hadn't visited all over the world, and so as different writers or artists or actors or directors or whatever, as they map out the parts of the gray areas on the map that weren't filled in, like then we see a whole new part. But it's unlimited.
Mhm.
Uh, there's a sort of I don't know if that makes sense. That was
No, it
coherent.
does because it's the same thing you're doing with like something like Bounty Hunters. All the stuff that you're writing in Bounty Hunters is not like an adaptation of what happens on the Book of Boba Fett or
Yeah.
Mandalorian or things like that. These are like side stories or stories that include some of the characters you might know, but this is what happens in between this movie and this movie, or this show and this show, or whatever, or this book, in this novel, or whatever. All these things happen in the in between stuff like that. Same with Star Wars proper main storyline is stuff that happens in between things because as we know it's not like episode one leads into episode two, three, four, five. Like it's not like there isn't little time gaps and jumps in between things. And when you're seeing Darth Vader on the screen in A New Hope, and then you don't see him on screen, what's happening at that moment you don't see him on screen is a lot of the stuff we get in comics and things like that, which I love because it gives
Yeah.
you more to the universe that we already love.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
that's
Sky's the limit with that franchise. Like there's just nothing that, there's no era that can't be explored or
Mhm.
doesn't have, fans or it's just an amazing it's just no offense to any
See,
other franchise, but there is something deeper, more beautiful, I think, than any other franchise, at least to me.
which is funny because it all started with A New Hope and the idea that like people passed on it. It makes me laugh because I was watching recently because we were doing this review of A New Hope with my buddy Paul Eaton, and I watched the Empire of Dreams documentary that's on
Oh
Disney
yes,
Plus,
yes, what a
and
great
like how
documentary.
like he George Lucas was trying to sell it to a few different companies, and Fox is the one that ended up taking it on. But like I always like it makes me think of like Google thing when like Google approached Yahoo or whatever to buy Google back in the day, and they're like, nah. And now look at Google now. It's the same thing I look back on, and I'm like, these production companies who passed on this to be what it is now is fascinating as all hell. And to be I mean, just the sequel trilogy made $4 billion. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I
Like,
mean it's but at the time,
oh
it
yeah,
was unlike anything else because at that time, sci-fi was considered like, okay,
yeah,
it's like cheap B movie material, um, other than maybe like 2001, and
yeah.
there wasn't really much in terms of like a big budget successful. I don't even think that was successful financially.
No, I don't think so either. Yeah,
Yeah, there wasn't much of that, so it was kind of considered. I mean, the only reason George Lucas got to make it at all was because American Graffiti had proven such a big surprise hit. But then when he came out with something that was completely different than American Graffiti, I don't know that anyone knew what to do with it. Especially as like the costs kept going up and there were all
hmm
these, and they were seeing dailies that looked ridiculous. Now it seems like, well, of course, but there was just no blueprint that showed
no,
that that was going to be successful. And because it's what made the other blueprints for all the
yep,
other, you know, summer blockbusters to come. But at that time, it was just not, not something that anyone. I mean, in hindsight, it looks brilliant, but at the time, it probably,
yeah.
I can't blame a single executive for thinking like, what did we get ourselves into?
I just picture like it failing and like blaming Fox executives blaming George and all that stuff. But then the people now that it was actually successful, all those people now going, look, see, we knew what we were doing. Yeah, we were
Always
so
the case.
smart there.
Yeah.
And the fact that like it's so big now that I mentioned that there's a Jedi Adventures that's on Disney Plus, and my 3-year-old's watching, and so on and so forth. There's little golden books. There's obviously all the merchandise rights. Now you did a 42 issue series, ongoing series about just the bounty hunters.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like obviously that's a bigger group of people in the lore than some of the other mini series that have happened and so on. But like the fact that the bounty hunters got their own comic book series, is fascinating to me. And it went 42 issues. Did you even expect that it would go that long?
Not at all. There was no way when we started. Like, you don't, I mean, I was a little naive, I think, when we started because I put some plot threads that actually, some of them I didn't wrap up till issue 42. But I always knew how I wanted it to end, and I hoped it would last more than a year, at the time, there's just no guarantees beyond like arc to arc.
hmm
And, often the sales side has to make a decision like whether or not to continue. But I think the unique part of what Marvel's done these last 4 years is they had, by setting all these books in the same time period, we could do those crossovers. We could
hmm
have things that happen in one have an impact in like another. And so that was kind of like a really cool golden age because most of the time in Star Wars comics history over the past, 40 uh 40 plus years, it was basically like sometimes it'd be something set in one era, or there was very little sort of interaction between these stories. And I kind of feel like the line was small enough that you, as a fan, like you didn't feel overwhelmed. But like if there was an event that you had to buy like, 74 books for the to understand the event, it was nothing like that. It was like the four main books, like usually an event series, maybe a offshoot mini series here or there. So it was like kind of was like the best of both worlds, uh, best of both galaxies. I don't know if
Eh.
the metaphor would be. So that was something really unique and cool. Like especially with that, with Alyssa's Afra, I
Mhm.
got to really sort of have some cameos of some of their like regular characters and all that kind of stuff. So it was cool. And like once in a while, Chewbacca would come and beat up Valance, and then Darth Vader would come and beat up Valance, and so like sort of had an all-star team beating up Valance at various times.
I mean, 42 issues is a long run now in any
Yeah,
galaxy, let alone Star Wars. Because I mean, like, let's be honest. I've seen, I recently said this to my buddy. I was like, I read a comic book series that was 5 issues, and after issue two, the publisher announced that it was promoted from a mini series to an ongoing series. And I was
yeah,
like, oh, that's really cool. That's awesome. It ended at issue 10. I was laughing because I was like, okay, that didn't really that would then it's not an ongoing series at that point. It's still a what mini maxi series at that point, a maxi
yeah,
series. I'm like, it's not an ongoing if you ended after 10 issues. But so like 10 issues now is like, oh my gosh, 10 issues or 12 issues or 15
yeah,
issues is crazy. Some of the Marvel ones, obviously your Spider-Mans and those ones get 50, 60 issues, but like most series nowadays, especially one, like I mentioned, this is not a Darth Vader, this is not the Dr. Aphra that's been going on for a while. This is the bounty hunters. It's a group of people. It's like to see
yeah.
this go 42 issues. Obviously, they had faith in you. They had faith in the sales. People were buying it, and people liking the reading and and the illustrations in it. Um, but are you also somewhat glad that now it's over, that you're now allowed to move
No,
on to
no,
something
well,
else?
not really. I don't think.
Okay.
And first of all, I just really also want to credit Marvel because a lot of times the decisions like when to cancel a book is very much driven by like the trade paperbacks and
Yeah.
like, oh, you finished an arc, now's the time because it's gonna. And so the natural endpoint would have been 41 at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
Dark Droids, but then so much was left unsaid. And so I had asked for a final issue, like so I could wrap this up. And then they not only gave me the final issue, they gave me a 30-page final issue. So that allowed me to do like not only wrap up Bounty Hunters, but also like there was a dangling plot thing from Guggenheim's, Chewbacca or Han Solo and Chewbacca. And there was something that we pulled from the Yoda series as well. And but also I was able to get Paolo Villanelli back for an 8-page coda, and like in my mind it was sort of like Return of the King, where
Mm-hmm.
after it ends, there's sort of like a bit of a coda on like what happens to the characters afterwards. Um, so that was kind of like that helped me wrap up some of the threads that I'd wanted to, and the funny thing is, like, whether it was going to end in 12 issues or 42, that last page was how I wanted it to end.
Okay.
And that was Valent. First of all, Valent smiling, which you don't see very much in
Yeah.
the 42 issues, holding his hand towards the reader. Um, and the line was, it was going to be some love interest that was not Yura. I didn't want it to be Yura because I felt like that would weaken Yura if she's just sitting around waiting for him to get his crap together. Uh, but and so I had no idea like the romantic part of it or whatever. But what I wanted for me, the theme of the book was Valance being the sort of PTSD veteran. He was put together physically and putting himself back emotionally, and then by the end, he was in a better place. So like
Mm.
gonna tear him apart for 42 issues, literally and figuratively. Like rip out his heart, literally and figuratively. And but by the end, he's kind of more at peace with himself. And so that was the journey, that the emotional arc that I always wanted to do. And being able to do it over 42 issues is much easier than over like say 10.
Yes.
So that was nice. But I wanted that kind of breaking like as if he's also extending his hand to the reader. And I knew the line was going to be something like, I have no idea what comes next, but let's find out together. And so even the characters that I co-created with Paolo and others, like Tanga and Losha, um, the couple, they'll live on with other people taking over the stories at some point. Whether it's writing another bounty hunters or just seeing them, come into other things. So, at most you're a custodian for a while, like, and that's an honor. And so it's kind of nice to know someone else can pick up these stories. So like I just wanted to make sure at the end of this issue, these various characters were in a place that someone else could take that baton and run with it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. That's what's cool about something like the galaxy or the universe that Star Wars is that, if this was a, I don't know, let's take Saga for an example. Brian K. Vaughan's coming back from his little hiatus again to do Saga. And that needs to end. That needs to end. And no one else is really going to take the mantle up from Saga and move on with any of the characters unless it's Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona. They are going to do that stuff. So with this, it's like one of those things that like you tied up some loose ends in Bounty Hunters number 42, but also left some things open and some characters like you mentioned so that other people could play with them. Because unless someone dies, they're in a universe that anybody's allowed to play with them as long as they're hired by Marvel. You can play with them at your house too if you want to write your own stories. So I'm not saying like professionally that Marvel's going to hire someone or Lucasfilm's going to hire someone to create these new books, like a Bounty Hunters book or something like that. Can use those characters, like you just said. So it's kind of cool because you had the ability to tie up some loose ends, but also like you don't have to tie them all up. You don't have to like it doesn't have to be like a nice little bow on the end of it. It can be a little scraggly on the end, so someone else can finish the stories.
Yeah, and what I learned is don't kill the characters off on page 8 of a tenant.
Like, you know what? But it's also comics
can,
and sci-fi and fake pop culture stuff. So like,
yeah,
no character's really always dead. Let's be honest.
yeah, and well, I don't love bringing back actually dead
Yes.
characters. I do love people thinking they're dead
Yeah.
and then and then dropping little clues that they're not. Like
Mm.
so like when Tonga looked like she was dead in issue 4, in issue 5 there was like a missing or there was like a panel where the escape pod was seen and there were footsteps seen from it. So like if you're looking for it, there's your clue. And then she came back, I think like 3 issues later
Yeah.
or something. So things like that I've often used, like a spaceship blowing up where Valance is in it. So you think like, how is he going to get out of this one? But if you actually see the
An actual person
body,
died. Yeah.
and it's a little tougher to do that. Like I don't in Star Wars also, I don't think you can do like a cosmic. I mean, okay, Darth Maul recovered. I'll grant you that, but most of the time, like you can't really have a supernatural explanation of how someone comes back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like it has to be grounded in the sort of the rules of the
Yeah.
world. That being said, if it's a Jedi or a Sith, you can get away with a lot more Force ghosts and such. But like certainly for bounty hunters, if I kill off a bounty hunter, they have
They're
to stay
dead.
dead. Yeah, unless it's a
Yeah.
droid, in which case they can be repaired, I suppose.
I mean, you're the parent company to there's clones and it's just clones
Yeah.
and actually in Star Wars too. But you know what I mean, like when Peter Parker's clones and all that stuff, there's clones
Yes,
that,
that's
that kind of
true.
trick people. But I also feel like that sometimes is like not lazy writing, but like weird writing because like okay, you could have just been like, oh wait, there's just a clone. It's the same thing as like at the end of it was all a dream. It's like okay, that you suck. You
Yeah,
should not have done that to
it's
me.
difficult to do well. I mean, people have done it well. It's
Yes.
difficult to do well because people are kind of desensitized. Like you kill off a character, it's like, oh, not again,
Yeah.
and they bring it back. So I don't love doing that personally. You know, if there's a fake out and you've breadcrumbed the sort of the truth, then I feel like you can get away with it. But like once they're actually dead, I kind of don't want to. But I haven't really killed that many characters in this series. Probably the biggest was Nakano Lash, but that was like a character that sort of lives on in flashbacks and um, but for the most part, like none of the major characters have I actually killed. I would have killed Dengar if I could have, but he exists in elsewhere in canon. So that that jerk got a reprieve.
I mean, and you mentioned the idea of like so we just maybe I mentioned and you mentioned about the idea of someone else playing with your characters that either you created or you've had to the idea to use the marionette and play with over the past couple of years. You're now getting the chance to use a character like Jango Fett that is a is an odd character to a lot of people who again it's one of those things that's cool about the Star Wars legacy and lore and I like a lot is I like the idea of using characters that are not like super popular. Like obviously we just had a Yoda series. It's obviously a Darth Vader series. The series with Obi-Wan and those series. Like those ones make sense to a lot of people because those are iconic characters that people know a lot about and want to read and stuff like that. But like Jango Fett's not one of those ones that's like jumps to the top of the list that would be like, oh yeah, that person needs their own comic book series in my mind when I originally thought about it. And I could be alone on that island, but obviously you didn't think so either because obviously you're writing this book. But
I pitched it and they said yes.
okay,
So
okay, see there you go. But I mean, so
what
like
I love,
Jango Fett, so when we went in what we
yeah,
went in Attack of the Clones.
what I love about Django is I love two things. Like first of all, uh he has that coolness factor that Boba Fett and the Mandalorian have,
Yeah.
and I guess Bo-Katan, and like the armor, the weapons, all that kind of stuff. Also, I kind of feel like having written Boba Fett a little and having written Jango Fett, like Boba Fett has a kind of darkness that clings to him, and I think part of it is having that seismic. I lost my father when I was 22, and like he was a kid when he lost his father, and his father was his world to him. And so I kind of feel like you both have like him trying to live up to this standard, and also just that he had this void in his life for his entire life. So like when I write Boba Fett, he's very much like it's a very he's not like a happy-go-lucky, swashbuckling kind of character. And I feel like Django, from what we've seen in canon, which is not as much as you think,
No, yeah.
uh, in the prequels, was more of a kind of Clint Eastwood. Clint has obviously played different types but he's more of a, kind of, he'll have a quip, but he's also at the top of his game.
Mhm.
And so I loved that he was a lighter version in terms of how you write him. And also, there wasn't as much baggage of what we know about Django that there would be if I did a Boba Fett series, or certainly if I did a Mandalorian series, which is tough because his story is being written as like now in real time, And so I feel like this was a pretty kind of cool to get that coolness factor of the look and the weapons and the that kind of story, but without having to not without there was I could set some of the what will be canon about him, because this is set like just before the Phantom Menace, so everything we really know about him is really coming a few years later. This is before Camino. This is when he's cementing his reputation as the best in the business. And yeah, so it's kind of it gave me creative freedom, but I also had a character that yeah, like maybe he's not as famous as his son, but he's just as cool looking, and all that is just as cool. So I kind of felt like I certainly felt no risk in it. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously I'm not the one making the financial case for it or whatever goes on behind the scenes. But yeah, I think it came out, it's going to sound like a humble brag or something, but like I think it came out exactly the way I wanted it to. And so um yeah, I hope one day to do more.
Is it a 5 issue miniseries? Is that the plan?
4 issue.
4 issue miniseries.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
And
fairly tight kind of. It's not a story with a lot of slow exposition heavy, character. um what's the word I'm looking for, like dissecting his own childhood or something.
yeah,
He's kind of thrown into a situation and has to kind of fight his way out. So
yeah. It's issue one right here. Well, by the time this is going to release on beginning of May, this episode, so that this issue two will be out on
yes,
the
two's out
shelves
Wednesday, I believe. This
24th.
Wednesday.
Yes, that'd be awesome. And did you plan to match up with Luke Ross again, or was this just
No,
happenstance? Like,
I'm almost never in any control with that, because like so
eh,
much of it is on the artist schedules and like what Marvel has artists working on. So that was just a dumb luck on my part. Um, but yeah, I mean, we work really well together, so it was just like I know what he likes to sort of do, and he has some freedom and things like that. And he's just fantastic.
honestly, that's great. It's always great when you always have that previous relationship. Like, I always feel like the first episode with a person like yourself on the podcast is like, okay, getting to know the person. How do they talk? How do they do these things? And then the second one makes it a little bit easier. So I can understand the same thing with a writer or artist collaboration is like the first time is like getting to feel what people's, how they do things and how they work. And then the second time or third time you work with the person, you're like, okay, I know this person. If I send Luke something, I know what's going to come back because I know how that person works. So I can just imagine it being a little bit easier than the first couple times that you work with someone.
Yeah, and also like, Nolan Woodard, who's the colorist,
Yeah.
just they work so well together. And so like the colors, it just really, there's I shouldn't spoil too much, but there's like they go to a sort of mining planet and you can practically taste the dust in the back of your mouth. Like it's so gritty looking. And then when the exhaust of the jetpack goes off, like you just really the flames are warm, and it's just all these subtle things that a you know that a colorist brings to the table too. They just really work well together.
Does this series like lead up to the episode where we see him on the movies, or is there some gap in between? I couldn't remember
I
what you said there.
can't say.
Can't say. Can't say.
I will say there's some twists and some
Okay.
things I think longtime fans will be excited about. I know that's a cop out answer, but I feel like anything more than that is going to be a bit of a spoiler.
I just think it's cool because I think there's like two sides of the coin here of using a character like this, which is like a popular a character people know, but like I said, you mentioned it's like not the most flashy of all the characters that are out there. Because like Star Wars can do that because they have the ability to say, honestly, a 4-issue miniseries that just says Star Wars on the top of it's going to sell some comics because those who are just Star Wars fans are going to buy them every time anyway. Jango Fett fans are going to be like, oh, this is really cool. People fans of you, and fans of Luke, and so on and so forth, and all that stuff leads to sales of comic books and people reading the book. But then there's the other side of it, like independent comic books. They're Kyle Starks and Ryan Brown are just doing this new series called Barfly, and
Mhm.
it's a character that was in the background of Patton Oswalt's and Jordan Bloom's book, Minor Threats, that's sitting at the bar, and now they're making a full mini series off of this dude sitting at the bar because people love this one character. And it's like this, like two sides of it. Like if you're your own independent creation, you can do whatever you want, and then
Yeah,
this
yeah,
stuff where you have like such a big fan base that it's like you really have to suck at writing this comic book, Ethan, for to not do at least somewhat well. For them to sell 4 issues pretty easily, in my opinion. But like I said, like you have to really been like issue one has to like be awful for not to at least do somewhat okay.
yeah, yeah. That's fair enough. No, I
So
mean,
Star Wars name does well for you.
it's never a slam dunk. It's never a sure
No,
thing because,
yes.
but at the same time, I also think like I don't mind writing a 4 issue series versus like, oh, it's got to be an ongoing or something. Because if you have a story that kind of the pacing works better or whatever, I mean, that's what I pitched. I pitched a
Yeah.
4 issue series for this. I could have extended it to like a 6 issue thing, but I kind of feel like it would have felt, extended. Like, this is one mission, and I felt like it works better as a 4 issue.
Obviously, you answered a question I had is like, which character are you really looking to write right now? And obviously, you did it with Django Fett in this series. But
Yeah.
like, I'm not saying you get to say these characters because I don't want if there is things in the work.
No,
But
I
like,
mean,
are there specific
look,
characters that
I'll
you're
be
interested
honest
in
with
reading?
you. I have a pitch that I really want to do with Jyn Erso in it.
Okay.
But there's tons of other characters. I always joke, I got into this into comics indirectly through a spec script I wrote involving a murder investigation into Greedo's death, and I love Greedo. I have a soft spot in my heart for him. I have a soft spot in my heart for Mace Windu because that was my first. Um, Wedge Antilles, for whatever reason, I like weird characters. I've gotten to write. I would like to one day write a story with a Jedi,
Yeah.
at forefront. Maybe not, necessarily like Luke or something like that because it's a little. It's almost like writing Superman or Spider-Man. It's like there's no safety net with that because
No.
it's like the premium characters. I kind of like I like writing a little bit of the offbeat characters that you can maybe take in surprising directions and things like that. So, maybe it's a Kit Fisto story or something. I don't know. But yeah, I do like there are tons of characters, but also like there are times people, someone will approach me and say, "Hey, we need, like Allegiance, the prequel to Rise of Skywalker." I was not anticipating getting the chance to write that, and so that came to me, and so hopefully there'll be other things like that.
Ethan, you're putting yourself in a situation where Marvel and Lucasfilm just look at you and go, "We need a story." And be like, "Okay, cool, I'll do it."
Uh,
It's in the Star Wars world. Okay, I got you.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not as my father used to say, like find a job that doesn't feel like you're
Yeah.
like at the circus shoveling elephant dung.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. And
I
you're
think I
doing that
found
right
that
now.
job.
And,
Just
and Mace Windu, speaking of Mace Windu, Mark Bernardin's writing an amazing Mace Windu
yeah,
series
yeah,
right now, which is awesome.
fantastic.
And it's actually a novel coming out this summer too.
Yeah.
That's gonna be really cool too. So I'm excited for Mace Windu getting some attention in his purple lightsaber.
I feel like it's been an underused character, and I would point out this: no disrespect, well, some disrespect to Yoda, but had Mace Windu been running the Jedi Council in the prequels,
Yes.
there would be no original series because he would have wrapped that up, before the yeah he was on top of everything,
Yeah.
and Yoda didn't really listen. So I feel Mace Windu is underappreciated. And had he not been betrayed by Anakin, would have wrapped it all up very quickly. And the Jedi Order would be thriving, by the era, of when the original trilogy took place. But there
Yeah.
would be no Empire to fight, so you wouldn't
No.
have the original trilogy. So yeah, so Mace Windu is undersung because he is just a real uh, badass
I
Jedi.
love the idea that this never gonna happen, but I would love like an alternate universe, like a what if Mace
Yeah.
Windu. That would be an
I know.
amazing
Is that
series.
an interesting story though? Because it's
I
like,
think so.
yeah, I wiped this out right at the beginning, and so
But what about some sort of tension like in that moment? A what if, and then like the end, like a 4 issue miniseries at the
yeah,
very end, it's all sunshine and rainbows and things like that. But like in that moment, could have been a lot of like tension or things like that. But I was just like, that's pretty funny. But the funny thing is that I haven't seen much of it. I don't know, and I'm 37, but I've been a big Star Wars fan for a while, but not like dire. Like this is the first legacy like Thrawn book I read was the Heir of the Empire. Like it was the new Thrawn Alliances comic book that I made me like, oh, I want to jump into that book and read that. And
mm.
but is there much what if out there? Like, I mean, that'd be kind of a cool thing if like what if stories and Star Wars would be kind of cool too, though.
I think they dabble with that, but I just the when you have a franchise where
Yeah.
what happens matters, like it matter if something happened in a movie, it matters across all the various other
Yeah.
stories. I feel like maybe you take a little bit of that away, with a I mean it's cool, but there's also plenty of stories to tell in this universe. Like, it doesn't have to always be the same, core characters.
And I'm excited to see where it goes. And I just mentioned this morning was that we're going on 2027 will be 50 years. Yeah, 50 years of
God.
Star
Wow.
Wars. It's
Yeah.
insane to think that it's been 50 years since A New Hope came out, and I can just picture that there's like minds turning behind the scenes over at Marvel and Lucas,
Sure.
like
Yeah,
they're
I'm
just
sure
figuring
there
that all
is.
out and trying to figure out comics and movies and all that stuff to figure out what's going to happen on that stuff. But like, are you excited to see where this is going? Like, obviously you're part of this. You get to talk to all these
Yeah,
people
I
that are
mean,
behind the scenes.
I don't get, I don't, it's not like we're in the
Correct.
loop of like what's going to
I mean,
happen
like
with
you
the
get to see
movie.
like some of the Kevin
Yeah, I
Scott
mean,
and
it's
Charles
an
and all those
honor to
guys
be
do
a
it. Yeah.
small part of, small
Yeah.
cog in the machine kind of thing. So yeah, I do feel like sometimes like I'm a part of it, and I think, I've not had a character like make the transition to live action or animated yet, and one day I think it will happen. But when I wrote Old Man Hawkeye for Marvel, they did it. There was a video game which incorporated an old Clint, and it was pretty much clearly the look was inspired by Marco Cacchetto's designs and all that, and the loose story, and so that was kind of an honor. And I have action figures on my shelf of that Hawkeye, and so um, one day I think probably maybe not Gwatako the Grim, the ill-fated villain who only lasted 8 pages, but maybe one of the other characters might make an appearance, and that would be kind of cool.
That's awesome to hear that. And, you're truly a fan of Star Wars, which makes it so much more fun to talk to someone about it. Like, obviously, there are, like I mentioned, pretty much all the people working on Star Wars right now, whether it be
Yeah.
from top to bottom, are fans of Star Wars. This is not like, again, you don't choose just to do this because it's a paycheck. Some people might, but I'm saying like, I would say majority of you guys, the reason you're doing this is because you have stories in your head or visualizations that artists want to write or put on paper and things like that, and that's why they do it. And so you wouldn't have just I want to work on Star Wars because I get to work on Star Wars. People are excited, and you can tell when you're talking Star Wars, you're like excited to be doing this. And some of it you could like say like, I can't believe I'm doing. It's like
Yeah.
this is your job. This is what you do for a living right now. It's great Star Wars. It's just amazing. But you also are you did a Haunted Girl. Are you going to do some more independent stuff at some point, create your own, or are you
Uh,
working on Star Wars alone right now?
there's like, unfortunately, it's the kind of thing where like, because some of the stuff is not announced, I
Yes.
can't
Yeah.
directly talk about it. There is another creator owned that I'm circling, hopefully, but I have no clue on when that gets done. I'm also doing another image book that is actually not mine, but I'm like a more like a work for hire. Um, and then uh, there's also a another there's another two books that are also not Star Wars, but are like different franchises that are
Cool.
really, really cool. But none of it is announced, so I can't
Yeah.
really.
No, you're good.
Unfortunately, I think it like, and there's also a graphic novel based on a or adapt like based on a board game called Blood Rage that was announced at San Diego last year, but I don't have a published date
Mm.
when it comes out. So unfortunately, like once Django goes out, like everything I'm working on is probably going to be a little while before it actually like is out in comic stores. So it'll, I am busy. It's just not in a place where I can talk about any of it, which is
Yeah.
kind of,
Well, I've always said to people too is like if you don't have something you can't talk about, you probably should because that
yeah,
means you have some end in sight to where you have work.
yeah,
Because like you always need to have something you can't announce yet because it hasn't been announced because you guys know about this stuff way in advance than we do. And so like you need to have that, hey, I can't talk about a thing because we need you
yeah.
to
It's
work
like,
because we want more Ethan Sachs stuff. So
they usually like make a big deal out of like an announcement or
yeah.
whatever. And so, I can't, me
Well, let's
blurting it
say
out without
Boom
that.
right now is like teasing us all. They're doing these like videos now that has like welcoming and then it's like a person's name and it's like this summer and it's all it is and I'm like stop
Yeah,
doing that
yeah.
please. But I mean I'm guessing Star Wars is in your future as well at some point if they want to tap you on to do something you're not going to say
Probably.
no,
There's something I'm waiting to hear back on
so
that
that's
would be
that's cool
really cool. Um, and I think is going to happen, but until it does.
till it does you can't say anything, there you go.
Exactly. Yeah, that was
um
the ellipses.
yeah, exactly right.
Until it does. Dot, dot.
But Bounty Hunters ended recently, and obviously those trades are coming out, and those things are all in the works for that. A lot of them are out because obviously 42 issues means that
Yeah.
it's been out for a while.
Yeah.
Including
Seven
Judges.
trades, and I hope that we'll get the omnibus treatment. I don't know anything one way or the other, so
But it'd be pretty so awesome.
yeah,
I would think that'd be a cool thing to have an omnibus
yeah,
of it. But there's also like I've said, that's a connecting books to all those things like the War of the Bounty Hunters and all that stuff, as well
yeah, yeah.
as A Haunted Girl comes out soon. Check out your local
Hopefully May
comic book store.
20th, May 21st, but yeah, I'll double check that because that was the date and I planned around it. And so if there's any change, makes me a little nervous that you're seeing that on Amazon.
Well,
So
so Amazon and bookshop.org say June 4th. Previous World still says May 22nd, which is the comic book release date. And we know some people might not know that the comic book and the bookstore release dates are usually separate. And that's why it's 21st and 22nd. Usually it's the day before comic book stores because that's how the publishing world works.
yeah,
Books come out on the first or the Tuesday and comics come out on the Wednesday. But yeah, I don't know where else that would be. I mean,
yeah, I'll
Image
have
would
to
know.
check that out because that if there was some kind of delay that I didn't hear about, that would kind of be the kind of thing I
I
would
don't know
like.
why comic book stores would have it the day. You know what I mean? Like it seems like a
Yeah,
weird
well,
thing
that's
that, but
like I said, I'm going to be at a Barnes and Noble on May 22nd, and if there's nothing there, then that's a problem. So,
yeah, exactly. But check it out wherever comic books are sold too, because Iconic Girls are a wonderful,
yeah, and also
wonderful.
thank
Go ahead.
you. Also, I was just going to say that if you can support your local comic store, that's always like in my mind the best place to get
Mhm.
everything. No offense to Amazon, I'm sure Jeff Bezos can afford
Yes, exactly.
to eat some of
Oh,
the
yeah,
same
absolutely. And
comic
it's one of
stores.
those things that if you don't if you go into your local comic book store on May 22nd and Haunted Girls some for some reason not on the trade paperback shelf, just tell them and they'll get it in. Usually it takes a
Yeah,
week or so, but like it's worth getting it in there because the artwork is phenomenal. I love the cover because the cover is not cover A. of
Yes.
issue 1, which I liked a lot, but like it's really cool that sometimes there's another cover to have on your shelf. So if you didn't get the variant that had that cover on it, it's kind of cool. Which is awesome because it's more vibrant too than the
Yeah, Fico
yeah,
Ossio. And the original one was Joe Quesada, so
yeah,
that's an embarrassment of riches for us.
exactly. But yeah, it's a wonderful story co-written by you and your daughter Naomi. So I hope that people pick that up and get that too out there. But yeah, get Jango Fett too. Jango Fett came out. First 2 issues are on the shelf. The next 2 are coming in the near future. So it's worth getting for Star Wars fans out there. But and if you want to learn more about A Haunted Girl, we have a previous episode with Ethan on. We talked about A Haunted Girl a bit more, so check that out too. But yeah, Ethan, I really appreciate you coming on, talking Star
Thanks for
Wars and
having
doing
me.
all this stuff with us and taking time out of your day. It's a much better world in New York right now, I guess, than it has been in the past. So hopefully get
Yeah.
outside and walk around a little bit. It's warmer out.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me again. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And I don't know when this comes, but if it's after before or after May the 4th, I'll say May the
Mid
4th
fourth.
with you.
It will technically we're gonna back and forth on this, but it actually probably will come out on May 8th. So we're just getting ahead of
Okay.
ourselves
So
here.
then
So
forget I said May the 4th be with you.
but no, we always May the 4th be with
May
you.
the 8th be with you.
Always. Yes, exactly. But I appreciate you taking the time out again. And thank you so much and have a great day.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.